Welcome. Thank you. Hi, Alex. Hi. Oh, this is great. Well, you guys are in for a real treat. Hello, my name's Gigi Fusco-Mies. I am with 3D Theatricals. And on behalf of my entire team, I want to welcome you to this session of 3D+U. I see a lot of familiar faces who have been taking full advantage of all these free seminars, these really master classes. So good for you. Good for you. I'm just so thrilled. Today, this session, I'm just so pleased to hand this session over to your instructor today on perspectives on directing for the theater. This gentleman, he is just multi-talented, not only being a tall, gorgeous blonde, but he's a published playwright, he's a published author, he's been a director, actor, he's got such amazing stories, just his life in show business family. There's just so much for him to share. So I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to Luke Yankee. Luke.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. I so appreciate your coming today. So this is called Perspectives on Directing. And, we can make this very kind of fast and loose and easy if you all have questions or anything. But I wanted to share a little bit about how I got into directing and some kind of stories from the trenches about some of the celebrities I've worked with, some designers I've worked with, and just some really fun stories about the business. And again, feel free to type in questions or raise your hand or whatever as we're going along. But I started out as an actor. I studied acting at Juilliard, and I sort of fell into directing. I had reached a point several years after Juilliard where I was kind of between types. And I certainly wasn't playing the young daddy yet, but I couldn't get away with playing the college kid anymore. And so the work as an actor just sort of dried up. So as I'm sure you all know, in this crazy business called show, we reinvent ourselves periodically. Sometimes it feels like every 5 minutes. And I was in the process of reinventing myself yet again. And so I thought I wanted to start pursuing directing. And just about that time, I was at a Christmas party for Ann Baxter, who was a neighbor in Connecticut. As some of you may or may not know, my mother was the actress Eileen Heckert, who won an Academy Award for the film Butterflies Are Free and is inducted Theater Hall of Fame. And I have some very interesting stories a little later on about directing her in a production of Driving Miss Daisy down in Florida, but we'll get to that. So anyway, we're at this party at Ann Baxter's house, and my mother is thick as thieves on the sofa in conversation with this lady who I knew was somebody in the theater, and but didn't know who it was. And I was just so fascinated that they were just going on and on for hours. So I thought, I need to know who this lady is. There was something about her energy that just really attracted me. And so I kind of wormed my way into their conversation. And this very direct, very strong, very gutsy woman suddenly turns to me and says, "Your mother tells me you're very talented. Do you sing?" And I thought, I better not screw this one up. So I said, "Yes, I sing." She said, "Well, you'll have to come in and sing for Hal and me in the new year." Now, there was only one Hal in the theater. Of course, Hal Prince. And so I said, excuse me, I didn't quite catch the name. And she said, "My name is Ruth Mitchell." And my mother's like, "Honey, this is only one of the most important women in Broadway in the last, 30, 40 years. And as I'm sure some of you know, Ruth Mitchell was Hal Prince's right-hand person, and in many cases his assistant director or associate director, and worked with him for a long, long time. They worked hand in hand. So I did go in and sing for Ruth Mitchell a few weeks later on the stage of the 46th Street Theater, which was a very heady experience. And I knew it was a courtesy appointment, but I said to her, "Ruth, I thank you so much. This was very kind of you. I'm also very interested in directing. And if you're ever looking for a coffee boy, a gopher, whatever, I'm sure you all probably know what a gopher is. Gopher sandwiches, go for coffee, whatever." So she called me. Actually, she didn't call. The stage manager called me about a week later and said, "How would you like to work for Hal Prince for the next 2 months for free?" I said, "Absolutely, I'm there." And that was what kind of launched me as a director. I was Hal Prince's coffee boy and took notes and all that sort of thing on a big old flop called Grind, starring Ben Vereen. And it somebody's got the sheet music for Grind there. That's amazing. Wow. That's amazing, Mr. Lamb. How wonderful. But so yeah, so I was Hal Prince's assistant on Grind, and it was the thing that was so amazing about working for Hal Prince. And some of you, I shared some of these stories before, so I hope I'm not repeating myself for too many of you. But for those of you who were here before, you can enjoy them again. The thing that was so incredible about Hal is that, I mean, he was such a charmer and so talented in so many different ways. And he created this aura from day one around the production where he was saying, well, darlings, when we do the movie. And so, you know, you sort of got the impression that you were working on the next Oklahoma. And I was reading the script and kind of scratching my head and going, I don't really get it, but if all these people are saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, then it must be me. I mean, what do I know at age 25? So it was just an amazing experience to sort of watch Hal work. And one of the things that he did that was so incredible is that Hal was, as wonderful as a director as he was also an amazing editor. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, in a particular moment, he would say to Ben Vereen, okay, Ben, for that moment, I want you to come in tomorrow with 5 choices. And then Ben would come in the next day with 5 choices because he was that kind of brilliant, imaginative actor and a brilliant musical comedy star. And so Ben would do the 5 choices and Hal would say, I think I like number 3 the best. And so, you know, that was one of the things that I learned about directing is to just, obviously you want to surround yourself with the best possible people. And it was an incredible rite of passage for me because you know, there was that moment when we were in out-of-town tryouts in Baltimore, and then we came to New York, the Mark Hellinger Theater, and it was also exciting. And there was one night I arranged for somebody else to cover for me in my backstage duties because I was, in addition to taking notes for Hal, I was wearing a lot of different hats. Paul Gemignani, by the way, was the musical director. It was a very star-studded event. And so there was that fateful night that I arranged for someone else to cover for me so that I could see, and I got my little program and I'm sitting in you know, row G and I'm just so excited. And I suddenly go, oh, it really stinks. Oh, it's got a few good moments, but for the most part, it just doesn't work. Because as you know, when you're working that closely on something, you can't see that. So after that, it was kind of difficult to kind of go back and play rah-rah cheerleader when you knew that the product was just not there. And another crazy story about Grind was that opening night in Baltimore. This was, you know, everybody had come down from New York to see Hal Prince's new musical. And that, you know, it was just teeming with New York producers and agents and literary managers and everybody. So the show had 2 turntables. And in a sense, it was about a burlesque house and an interracial relationship between a Black woman and a white man during the Depression. And obviously during the Depression, such things were unheard of. So, and it had these 2 turntables, sort of, think of kind of a burlesque era version of the classic set for Dreamgirls, you know, with the towers that kind of spun around and everything. So this had 2 towers on the side and 2 turntables, a very, very elaborate set. And I remember it cost $5 million, which in 1985 was a fortune for a musical. I mean, that was huge. So about 15 minutes into the show, opening night in Baltimore, all of a sudden the turntables start turning very, very slowly, and then they just stop. And the show cannot function without these turntables. So ultimately they brought the curtain down, and I have this vision of standing in the wings and seeing about a dozen burly crew guys with jackhammers and you know, you name it, and crowbars, and they're just tearing things apart. And I'm thinking, this is not good. So finally they realized the turntables were not moving. I mean, there was nothing going to happen that night. So Hal Prince had to go out and make a little speech and say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry. I hope you'll come back another time. So we were all pretty shocked. So and this is another example of the aura Hal Prince would create around a production. Is that the stage manager gets on the loudspeaker and she said, well, ladies and gentlemen, the good news is the opening night party is still happening. The bad news is it doesn't start for 2 hours. So, so we all get to this elaborate opening night party, and the Broadway producers and Hal Prince and everybody's saying, darlings, the same thing happened at the out-of-town tryout of My Fair Lady. It's a good omen. But it taught me a great deal as a director, which is kind of the point of this, about just having that positive energy, always having that can-do attitude, always saying yes. For any of you who might have studied improvisation, there's a thing that they talk about where in improvisation, you always want to say yes and. You never want to say no but. I mean, if somebody comes out and says, well, it's really cold here today in the streets of Chicago, you don't want to say, you're crazy. We're in Palm Springs and it's 110. I mean, that would be a no but. I mean, you always want to say yes and kind of go with the energy. So that was one of the incredible things I learned from Hal Prince. And also, having had that as a calling card, I was then, needless to say, it opened a lot of doors. And Hal, God bless him, was a tremendous mentor to me, and I kept in touch with him pretty much until his death. He was just an extraordinary man and obviously a genius and such a force in the American theater. If you haven't seen that amazing PBS documentary directed by Lonnie Price about Hal, it was on Great Performances. It's just sensational, and I would highly, highly recommend that. As Gigi is saying, mouthing fantastic, yes. Yeah, definitely. So I got a lot more stories, but any questions at this juncture? I can certainly go on, but any questions so far?
Raise your hand. Anybody have any questions?
Like I said, I can certainly keep talking.
Well, listen, you've got the most amazing stories. What do you see, Luke, is the primary role? I'll get to you, Chase. Now that I started, I got to finish now. The primary role of the director, especially in a musical theater production. Most of our people are musical theater people.
Sure.
Then I'll get to you, Chase.
Yeah, it's, as I said, I mean, Hal was so good at playing editor, but, as a director, you're wearing so many different hats. I mean, you're playing leader, you're playing traffic cop, you're playing psychologist. It's just really, there are so many different hats that a director always has to wear. And one of the things when doing a musical, and this is certainly true with a play as well, but I think more so with a musical even, is, obviously this is such a collaborative art form. And the way one collaborates with designers. I didn't study directing formally. I had more kind of on-the-job training, which was kind of amazing. But as a result of that, when I would first have meetings with designers, I was so scared because I knew I didn't entirely know how to speak their language. And I was afraid if I told them the wrong thing, the set would just come out all wrong and not the way I wanted. I mean, an example of that I always think of is that where a director may see a scene as angry and intense, a director sees it as crimson and jagged. So, different ways of saying the same thing. So it's just learning how to speak one another's language. And the very first show I directed, it was a play called The Diviners about a farm community in Indiana during the Depression. And I told the designer I wanted the set to be mud brown. Well, that to me, I mean, I didn't feel like I needed any other description other than that. I mean, mud brown is like a dark, almost kind of chocolate brown to me. And that's, well, so I came in to see the painted set and it was butterscotch. And it was like, I'm sorry, but this color kind of looks like baby shit. And I'm so sorry I wasn't clear, but you're gonna have to repaint the set because this just is not going to serve the play. So, you know, again, I kind of learned the hard way about getting paint swatches and that sort of thing beforehand. But Chase, you had a question?
Go ahead and let me unmute him. There he is.
Okay.
I've done a lot of music theater and some directing as well in film.
Wonderful.
And I was curious how you made that jump, or if you even see it as a jump. Did you just go, I'm directing this, no, I'm directing this? How did that sort of happen for you?
Thank you, that's a good question. So once the bug had bitten me, and I totally felt like I was wearing shoes that fit for the first time, I lived about an hour outside of Manhattan at the time. And so I would go back and forth for a number of years while I was, you know, temping on Wall Street as an executive secretary during the day to make ends meet. And in the evenings, I would sort of go back and forth between assistant directing on Broadway and doing my own stuff in church basements, you know, wherever they would have me at first. And I did a lot of stuff at this little tiny theater in Connecticut, which really literally was a church basement. And I knew the artistic director, and so I just said, hey, I'd like to do this show. And he's like, oh, we haven't done that in a while. Oh, I've always wanted to do that. That's great. And God bless him. He was a man named Al Pia, and he pretty much let me do whatever I wanted. And so again, it was sort of on the job training, which was really terrific. But one of the other stories I wanted to share was I had the dubious distinction of directing, I mentioned earlier that my mother was the actress Eileen Heckert, and I had the dubious distinction of directing her in, somebody said Al Pia was my dad's best friend. How fabulous is that? Oh, how wonderful, Beverly. I adored Al Pia. He was an amazing man, and he's the one who really kind of gave me my start as a director. He was an incredible man. So anyway, but I directed my mother in a production of Driving Miss Daisy down in Florida. And
So sorry, that must
ironically,
have been crazy.
yeah, it was a lot of people thought I was insane to be taking that. Yeah, and looking back, I kind of wonder. So I've got some really funny stories about that because, I mean, for those of you who know, my mother was like a chain-smoking, kind of tough cookie. And as an actress, I mean, she was hard on Mike Nichols, let alone her son. So, but I had always, it had been from the moment I saw Driving Miss Daisy off Broadway before anyone had even heard of it, I was determined that someday I would direct my mother in it. So actually several years went by, and when all the regional theaters started doing it, I contacted an equity theater in her hometown of Columbus, Ohio. It's called Players Theater Columbus. And I contacted the artistic director, and so they were going to do this whole thing about, you know, Ohio girl comes home and all of this, and he was very excited, and I was thrilled. And so I told her, and she said, honey, I left Columbus for a reason. I don't want to do it there. So, oh my God. So I was committed to do the production now. So I did it with another actress, a wonderful actress who did a number of soap operas. Her name was Frances Helm, and who was also a family friend. But the good thing was I was able to get it under my belt so that by the time I was doing it with my mother, I knew the show and I knew how to make it work, and I knew what worked. So that was kind of fabulous. So it ended up being a blessing in disguise. So a couple more years go by, about another year and a half, and I wound up doing a production with my mother down at the Coconut Grove Playhouse in Miami, very prestigious theater. And the artistic director, the producer, had been trying to get her there for a while to do something, and she said through puffs on her cigarette, well, Luke's been bellyaching to do Miss Daisy with me. You think you'd be interested in doing that, or your audience is sick to death of it? So they agreed, and so we had a production in Florida, and boy, I learned so many important lessons. And we agreed that I wasn't exactly going to say, Mommy, would you please cross stage left? So we agreed that I would call her Eileen in rehearsals, and we keep everything, very professional and very above board. And so, we did the design presentation and all, and then we took a little break before we started rehearsals. And so she comes in and she's like, all right, now we got to get some ground rules going before we get started here. Now, first of all, you can't smoke in this damned building, so we have to have a cigarette break every 30 minutes. I want fresh orange juice in the backstage refrigerator. And she's going on and on and on with her lengthy list of demands. And I'm just thinking to myself, all right, you've seen Dad deal with this over the years. So let her win on all the small points. Then when it really matters, you'll have some traction. So I'm just listening, saying, all right, Eileen, I think, yeah, okay, sure, Eileen, no problem, that's fine, sure. So we start actually getting into blocking, and she's fighting me on everything. I mean, absolutely everything. She's like, why the hell would I want to cross left on that line? I don't want to cross left, I want to sit down. Okay, Eileen, then why don't you sit down? But every single thing was a battle. And this was a really important lesson that I learned. The actress I had done it with in Ohio, as I mentioned, was an actress named Frances Helm, who was a friend of hers. And that shouldn't have mattered. But since she was a friend, I would say things like, Eileen, on this cross, Frances used to do this wonderful bit where she sort of punctuated the moment with putting her hat pin in her hat. And it was just so fun. I was wondering if you would be willing to try that. So she just sort of shot me a look. And about the third time I said this, she turned to me and she said, you keep talking about this hat pin. In the first place, I'm not a hat pin kind of actress. And in the second place, if you think Frances was so fucking wonderful in the part, why don't you just fire me and hire her? I said, oh, Eileen, I'm so sorry. I will never mention Frances or the hat pin again. Said, thank you very much. So I learned a big lesson about, saying to one actress something wonderful that another actress had done. Oh boy. So we're going along and we get into technical rehearsals. And at one point she's suddenly making a cross and she takes her hat pin and she goes, whoop. And she said, is that what you wanted with the hat pin? I said, well, yes, Eileen, that was wonderful. So, oh, Jesus, I don't have a big deal with a fucking hat pin. But she did it. And I must say, there was no greater thrill for me as a director than opening night to see her get a standing ovation as Driving Miss Daisy in the production that I directed. George Abbott was there in the audience, the legendary director, and just, a lot of amazing people. I think Hal Prince came to see it later on in the run because he has a house in Florida, and he was always so supportive of me. But a lot of people said, boy, Luke, you're taking on a lot directing your mother.
Sure, well, not just your mother, but your mother, Eileen Heckert, like you said.
My mother, an Oscar winner. Yeah. And a 5-time Tony nominee.
So yeah.
It was. Yeah, it's and the other interesting thing about that, which I'm just looking at our time, and this kind of says more about our relationship than it does about directing. But it's an interesting story about that. So there was a dear friend of the family's named Ken Lewis, who was a set designer, and she and I both had a very unique and special relationship with him. And so she called Ken after 2 or 3 days down in Florida. And he says, so Eileen, how's it going with Luke? She says, oh, it's pretty rough. He's like, why? What's the problem? And she said, Ken, I'm so afraid he's not going to be any good as a director. And he said, well, Eileen, you've had enough bad directors over the years that if he's not, you can make it work. But why don't you give him the benefit of the doubt? Maybe he'll surprise you. So after that, she kind of started coming around and started actually listening to me and trying what I suggested. And after she died, Ken told me that 2 days before the show opened, she called him back and she said, Ken, I'm not just saying this because I'm his mother, but he's good. He's really good. And he said, now, isn't it wonderful that you got to experience that and you got to learn that for yourself? So it was, and like I said, I never heard that story until after she died. And while I'm just on the subject of my mother, before I get on to some other stuff about directing, got a great story about Peter Falk I want to share with you. I actually wrote a play that I've been developing for a while, and Gigi has been a big supporter of it, God bless her. And it's called Marilyn, Mom and Me. And one of the things my mother was famous for on film was she played Marilyn Monroe's best friend in the film Bus Stop. And she and Marilyn developed this really, really incredible bond. And basically, it's about these two very different women who kind of bonded through their wounds, through both being adopted children, never really feeling wanted, never really feeling like they belonged. And it's about my mother's relationship with Marilyn, but it's kind of more about how this impacted me and how it impacted my relationship with my mother. So I'm very proud of the fact that it's gotten tremendous response and has won several new works festivals back before they all dried up. I'm actually doing a virtual staged reading of it with the same cast I had in New York for an off-Broadway reading at Manhattan Theater Club, including Robert Cuccioli, who was nominated for a Tony for the original production of Jekyll and Hyde. And if you go to the Luke Yankee YouTube channel, just go onto YouTube and search Luke Yankee channel. It will be available online as a benefit for the Actors Fund, and that part of it is optional, whether or not you choose to give to the Actors Fund. But if any of you would care to tune in, it will be available online starting this Thursday at noon, West Coast time, through Sunday at noon, West Coast time. So I'd love to have some of you check that out. I'm very proud of it. I just was finishing editing this morning and was crying a lot as I did. So,
well, and let me just
very personal story.
say, you do not want to miss seeing this staged reading. I've seen all of Mr. Yankee's work and have been there luckily through workshops from beginning of a lot. And this one is it's just something, it'll take your breath away. The story is fantastic. And you can really see, we learn a lot about Marilyn that we did not know before. The fact that, she had this great relationship with your mom and what they shared with each other and how it affected you, especially, which makes a great story. So please, I would recommend to everybody check that out. But now let's move on. So you said you had a Peter Falk story?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking to see if anyone's got any questions here. No, nothing updated. Anyone else? Any questions?
Wait.
Chase, you have another question?
Well, I just didn't hear how you switched into film.
I haven't really switched into film.
You haven't really
I've
switched.
done
You guys just did both and just went back and forth?
I mean, I've never really done film. I've done casting for film and television and that sort of thing. I've written for written some films, but I haven't really directed for film.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
A couple of kind of little student film kinds of things, but I haven't really. That's not. You're ahead of me in that one.
We're all about the theater today, and you're with this
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
Luke, tell us all about Mr. Falk.
Yes. So one of the Broadway directors I assisted not too long after working with Hal Prince was a wonderful director named Ellis Rabb. And some of you may know that name. He ran the APA Phoenix. He was married to the actress Rosemary Harris. Even though he was gay, that was what one did in that era. And Ellis was sort of, he was, the way a Broadway director would look to a housewife in a red state. I mean, he had a long cigarette holder and always wore, silk scarves around his neck. And, his speech was terribly grand and he sort of talked like this, he's very, as if he'd just come over the garden wall. And a wonderful man and a wonderful director. And he had tremendous success with the Broadway revival of You Can't Take It With You, with Jason Robards and Elizabeth Wilson, an incredible cast. And this would have been, oh gosh, in probably the mid to late 80s. And I was his assistant at the Amundsen Theater in Los Angeles on a production of Light Up the Sky with an incredible cast: Peter Falk, Fritz Weaver, Nancy Marchand, Barry Nelson, Deborah, just this incredible all-star cast. Pardon me. And it was, everyone thought that this was, once again, I mean, this was going to be, you know, the great white hope of the theater season. And it was not, because it was a wonderful production of a play that unfortunately seems very dated and doesn't entirely hold up. So after the play got very mediocre reviews, and it was very clear that we were not going on to Broadway, Ellis went home. I mean, he just left town. And the producers kept me on as his assistant to sort of maintain the show and take notes and all that sort of thing. So here I am at about age 26, having to give notes to people like Peter Falk and Fritz. I mean, it was a little scary. So one night I had a note for Peter Falk. And the stage manager saw me standing outside his door with my clipboard, just sort of, you know, there with my fist poised, just, you know, thinking about how I was going to say it and just sort of getting up the nerve to give this note to Peter Falk. And the very tough, salty stage manager walks by and she says, "Oh, go ahead. You're bigger than he is." So I go in and there's Peter, you know, putting on his socks. He's like, "Yeah, Luke, what can I do for you?" It's like, yeah, Peter, there's that moment in scene 3 where you're playing that line for a laugh. And in terms of the arc of the scene, I wonder if it's really the appropriate place to, you know, to get a laugh. And I was wondering about what your thoughts were on that. And he took his cigarette out of his mouth. He said, "Took me 3 weeks to find that laugh, and I ain't losing it now." Well, have a good show, Peter. Great, thanks. Yeah. I mean, what was I going to say? There's a question here. What advice would you give younger directors? I'm 16 and have directed a couple of shows and I'm in the process of starting a theater company. Would you have any tips from a seasoned pro? How great, Sean. Yes, Sean, I thank you, and I'd be happy to give you some tips. Again, the most important thing for any director, really, is communication. And just really coming across as open and an open vessel. And, you know, just being in a state of collaboration. Before, I mean, this is a collaborative process. And you just, so it's not a matter of saying, do it this way, you know, but it's a matter of kind of, it's interesting. The actress Tova Feldshuh, wonderful actress who originated Yentl on off-Broadway, and oh gosh, she's done so many other things. But her brother is a director. And I remember her talking about, I saw her do one of those, it wasn't inside the Actors Studio, but one of those American Theater Wing seminars. And she talks about how, you know, he would go in on the first day of rehearsal and he would, you know, sit down and have his blocking all mapped out and you know, just have everything to a T. And then after a point of time, he would go in and just sort of hack around with the actors. And, you know, I think there's sort of a happy medium. I mean, you know, Gigi's directed a great deal, so feel free to chime in here, Gigi. Of course, you have to do your homework. You have to be prepared. You have to understand as much as possible about the time period of the play you're directing and the music and you know, the what was going on socially and you know, all of those things sort of affect how one approaches a piece as a director. But you know, again, it's like, for instance, you go in with your blocking chart and be prepared to throw it all away. Because so many times in the moment you find so many other things are, it suddenly becomes organic. It's like, you know, I thought I needed you to be upstage of the sofa, but no, that's not going to work. So fine, let's just try something else. One experience about being flexible as a director, kind of a funny story. And I remember I was living in Manhattan, and back when I was in the days when I was temping in the law firms, which ties into this story. And I saw this little tiny ad in Backstage for a teacher of musical theater at the foremost conservatory in Germany. And it was sort of like it was like the Juilliard of Germany, called the Folkwang Hochschule. And they were, yes, and they were just starting a musical theater program and were looking for instructors. Well, doesn't say anything about having to speak German, so what the hell, I'll send my stuff. So I start getting these letters back addressed to Herrn Luke Yankee, all in German. And so I would get somebody at the law firm to translate them for me. And I would always say, I don't speak German, and I don't know if that's a qualification for this job or not, but could you please write to me in English next time? Then I'd get another letter addressed to Herrn Luke Yankee. This went on for months until finally I was one of 2 finalists to run the musical theater program of the Juilliard of Germany. And they were flying me over and going to have me do scenes and all this kind of stuff. And it was crazy that I'd gotten this far. So they had a couple of scenes they wanted me to do. They wanted me to do a couple of scenes from Kiss Me Kate. And they wanted me to do a couple, and then there was something else that I was able to choose. So I chose a scene from Evita, and the song I'd Be Surprisingly Good for You. And pardon me, in German, I'd Be Good for You translates something like, forgive me if any of you speak German, it's something like, Ich bin gut für dich. Well, it kind of sounded like something else to me, but I went with it. And the thing that was so crazy was I get over there and I've got my interpreter and I'm working with my students, and the number they wanted me to do from Kiss Me Kate was Brush Up Your Shakespeare, which is Schlag nach ein Shakespeare. So I'm working with my interpreter, and I had worked out everything meticulously ahead of time because, as you know, that number is all about the Shakespearean puns and all of that. And so I get over there, and the way that song translates, it was totally different, and all of the puns were totally different. In fact, there was something about, the only one I can remember, it was something about Iago being a good guy from Chicago. And the interpreter said to me, so Chicago to them means gangsters. It's like, okay, let's try this. So everything I had mapped out, I mean everything, had to be thrown out the window. And I was totally thinking on my feet. And somehow I managed to pull it off. But when push came to shove, they wanted somebody to move to Germany for at least 5 years and, you know, to really establish this school. And I was not in a position to do that. So they went with the other person who spoke fluent German, and good for them. But it was a real experience as a director in just, you know, learning to be able to turn left and to just go in a totally different, I mean, because everything I had worked out was useless. And so I would just say to the interpreter, okay, what does this mean? Then he would translate it for me, and then, okay, let's try this. So it was an experience, needless to say.
Sounds like it. You know,
Yeah.
Luke, we have about 10 minutes left.
Great.
I want to ask you a question. You know, you direct both musicals for the stage as well as straight plays. How do you, as a director, how do you prepare? Do you prepare differently for a musical as you would do for a regular play?
Not really. Generally, and this is a gross generalization, but generally there tends to be more of an intensity with plays than there is with musicals. I mean, that's certainly not true across the boards by any means, but I mean, the whole sort of, I don't want to say absurdity, but the whole thing of, you know, okay, I'm suddenly going to break into song in the middle of this monologue or whatever. You know, there is a further degree of a suspension of disbelief than there can be in a play. So, you know, making that work can certainly be challenging. But I don't think there's that much of a difference. I mean, again, one is certainly implying the same rules, and also with a play, one can have a very long scene, which you generally don't have in musicals. It tends to be more of a short scenes. So there's a certain amount of stamina that one needs to develop, and also certainly that the actors need to develop in doing that.
How important when you are doing a musical is your relationship with the production team? Because then you have your musical director, your choreographer, maybe some dialect coaches. Talk us through that dynamic when you're directing.
Absolutely. Obviously, that collaboration, while it's important in a play, it's so much more important in a musical. And as a result, I tend to work with the same team whenever I can. Because, in a musical, the relationship with the choreographer and the musical director is absolutely vital, absolutely vital. And because they are every bit as much responsible for the finished product as you are. And I ran a summer theater in Pennsylvania for a while, this gorgeous 1,000-seat opera house where we did, literally like one a week stock. I mean, I'll never forget putting up Gypsy in 6 days. It was insane. And, doing big musicals, and like the most we ever had was 10 days. But in a situation like that, it's certainly all the more important to have all your homework done ahead of time and to just kind of know what you're diving into, because in a summer stock situation, you'd be working on 2 or 3 shows at once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll introduce you to one of our resident fabulous musical directors. Julie Lamoureux is part of this session. I see her there, so I'm going to.
Oh my God! I'm a
She's
big fan of yours, Julie. Yes,
Julie,
I've seen you.
How many shows have you done for us at 3D?
Oh, 8 or 9. So.
And fabulous.
Julie, the name was there's no pauses in the name, so I didn't make the connection. I'm a great admirer of your work. I've seen a lot of your shows, and thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you, Luke. My pleasure to meet you. Loved your stories today.
What did I do? I accidentally muted you, Luke Yankee. Can't do that. We only have a few minutes left. I just want everybody to know, Luke, for those of you who don't know, in fact, I was concerned. I was looking at the faces of some of our attendees, and I'm wondering if they're old enough to even know who Peter Falk was. But, Luke you can find online, he did a one-man show called Diva Dish that you can probably find online snippets of. And he did a little short version of it for us, and maybe we can have him come back and do it again. But he has growing up with his mother being Eileen Heckert, and growing up in Connecticut where his neighbors were, Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman and Vivian Vance and Ethel Merman coming to the house. Mind-blowing, right? It shares these stories of these people that, maybe we're a generation away from people not knowing who they are. So it's great that you have this legacy, that you have these stories. So maybe we'll have you back and tell us more of those. But in the meantime, he has an amazing book called Just Outside the Spotlight, which is a beautiful Valentine to his mother. It's a great book, and it has a lot of these stories. And like he said, with Marilyn Mom and Me, the staged reading, that's going to be on the Luke Yankee YouTube channel, running from, what did you say, May?
This Thursday, which is the 14th through Sunday the 17th. And the other thing I want to let you know, just in terms of the director-choreographer collaboration, within the coming weeks, I'm going to be interviewing Larry Fuller, who was the original choreographer of Evita and On the 20th Century and Sweeney Todd, did a lot of shows with Hal Prince, obviously, and Larry is a dear friend of mine. And so I said to Gigi and TJ, hey, I'd love to interview Larry. He has amazing stories because he also worked on the film of A Little Night Music with Elizabeth Taylor, and he's got incredible stories. And of course, Madeline Kahn on the 20th Century, and he also collaborated with Michael Bennett on some productions. And so Larry's got incredible stories. So I hope you'll tune in when I interview Larry.
This has been amazing. Unfortunately, with the world situation and the stay-at-home order, we're all isolating, but yet everybody has been so wonderful to offer their knowledge, their gifts, share with all of us. 3D+U has been set up, and I'm so happy that people have been taking advantage of these master classes. We've had agent roundtables and musical director roundtables and dance and yoga and drag makeup 101, as you can see. And, you know, it just fills my heart that, first of all, that we're able to do this for you and that you're participating, and that people like Luke are so kind to give of their time and share these great stories with us. And it's just been amazing. So Luke, before I'm going to have you think about the last fun story you're going to share with us. While you do that, I just want to let everybody know, you know, 3D+U, we come to you Monday through Friday. We have 6 sessions a day. We post our schedule on Instagram, Facebook, our website, and e-blasts. And what else? Oh, we've got a big 3 o'clock. We've got a big special guest.
Of course you do, with Joel Zwick. I'm sure you do. Colden has a question. Do we have time?
Yeah, well, we'll have time. But I just want to say we have veteran director Joel Zwick. He has directed everything that you've ever seen on television, from Mork and Mindy, Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks, Robin Williams, The Jamie Foxx Show, Full House, Fuller House. You name it, he's directed it. Plus, he directed My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I'm sure everybody's favorite movie. So you don't want to miss that.
I'm glad I didn't have to follow Joel Zwick. My goodness, those are big shoes to follow. But Colden, what was your question?
Yeah, Colden, go ahead.
First, let me begin. Thank you, Gigi and 3D, for introducing me to Mr. Yankee. I was unaware of him, but now I am. And I was researching all your stuff last night. I'm like, wow, this is absolutely incredible. And just letting you know, when I was researching your stuff, I immediately bought a copy of your book off of Amazon, because I love The Bad Seed so much. It's my favorite movie, and she's the best part of that movie. But anyway, here's my question.
Please.
Here's the first part, is I'm extremely interested in becoming a director, but I don't know how to start or where to begin. So my question is, how does one become a director? Is it doing what you did, which is being a coffee boy, or is it going to get an MFA, or is it to become a famous Broadway actor and then you have the green light to go ahead and be a director? I would love to hear what you have.
Yes, and yes. I mean, there is no one way to do it. I just did it in the only way I could sort of think of. And again, I mean, as I said, I started out directing things in church basements and wherever they would let me. I mean, I would suggest just get together with, when one can do this again, when things calm down, just get together with some of your friends and live reading plays, and maybe you kind of play director, and tell them some things to work on, or maybe just do some scene work. I'm a firm believer in the value of free pizza. It's like, hey, come over, I'll give you pizza and we'll read this play or whatever. So there is no kind of one way. I mean, yes, there's a lot of value in going and getting an MFA, and if you have any interest in teaching in the future. I mean, I went back and got my MFA very late, but it was one of the smartest decisions I ever made, because I haven't stopped working since, teaching at Cal State Fullerton and Chapman and all over the place. But, again, I would say, Colden, whatever kind of speaks to you, but just, start doing it in any way that you can, really, whether that's just getting friends together and reading plays, or, doing scenes in class, or, find a directing class or something, whatever works for you. Definitely. Just, because here's very briefly, I'll leave you with one of my favorite stories about directing. It's from Mike Nichols. And in fact, I wanted to open with this, but it's good to end with it too. Somebody asked Mike Nichols, great director of The Graduate and so many amazing films, and also so many plays on Broadway, Barefoot in the Park, and so many other things, and Spamalot. And somebody said to him, asked him about directing. And he thought for a minute, and he said, directing is like making love. Nobody teaches you how to do it. Nobody watches you do it. The people you do it with never tell you if you're any good at it or not. And even if they do, you don't believe them.
Well, God bless you, Mr.
I remember saying that to a friend of mine, and she said, "No, I think that says more about Mike Nichols' sex life than it does about directing." But there you go.
Try to stop the mid-sentence. Well, you know, everybody, I can't, Luke, thank you again so much for your time. You can see that we could go on for hours with just Luke.
But you've got Joel Zwick waiting. And thank you all so much.
Waiting.
If any of you have other questions you didn't get to ask, go lukeyankee.com is my website. There's a link to my email there. You know, feel free to look me up. And if other questions or things come up, you know, other funny stories you want to hear that I didn't get to, I mean, please feel free.